Stop now, breathe. Notice what is happening inside you at this. There is a sudden energy, almost impossible to name, crosses the air when a message carries truth. When a message touches the part of your mind that you have been trying to keep asleep for years. Jung said that awakening never begins with answers, but with a silent call that first opens a fissure, then a corridor, and finally an entire destiny. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is the call you have been ignoring without realizing. Now it returns, stronger, clearer, more urgent. Jung believed there is a specific moment in life when consciousness is pulled to the surface by something greater than one's own. It's the instant you feel you can't continue being who you've been. Not because life is falling apart, because some part of you, that most intimate and true part, tired of surviving in the dark. Have you ever felt that? The feeling that you're living below your potential, as if an inner force is pushing you out of outdated version. This feeling isn't confusion, anxiety, or emotional exaggeration. For Jung, it's the self, the deepest core of the psyche, trying to emerge despite the resistance of your personality. And when the self calls, everything trembles a little. Certainties shift. Beliefs begin to contort. The world seems the same, but something inside you is no longer. Even if you try to ignore it, even if you try to maintain your routine, even if you try to immerse yourself in the external noise, the unconscious continues to speak. It doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it just insists. And it is precisely this insistence that shapes entire destinies. Jung said that ignoring this call is choosing to live half a life. And, deep down, that living half a life is a silent pain that drags on for years. Seeing it. That's why this moment matters. You're not just watching a video or reflection. You're facing one of those moments that unsettle, moments that provoke, moments that make it clear you're on the verge of something you may not even understand, but that you feel viscerally. And no matter how rational or skeptical you are, there's a part of you that understands this kind of message in a way that doesn't go through logic. It goes through the body. It goes through silence. It goes through recognition. You feel it before you understand it. And then comes the question Jung always asked, the question that separates those who awaken from those who remain asleep. What exactly inside you reacts when you hear something like that? Is it fear? Is it expectation? Is it curiosity? Is it discomfort? Is it a forgotten memory trying to resurface? Or is it just that strange, almost electric feeling that some piece you've been searching for years has finally started to move? Don't ignore this question. It's worth more than all the answers you've collected to date. Because, for Jung, awakening doesn't begin with clarity, but with restlessness. It is restlessness that announces you are about to cross an inner frontier. A frontier that can lead you to a new perspective on who you are, what you want, what you are willing to face to achieve the life you know deep down you deserve. Restlessness is the first sign of inner fortune. Fortune for Jung is not material luck. It is a psychological state in which you cease to be your own enemy. When this happens, the external world has no choice but to respond differently. But before any change comes the initial impact, the shock of realizing you never fully belong. This shock is uncomfortable but necessary. It forces you to look at yourself with an honesty you may not have dared to face before. It reveals that something inside you is more alive than you imagine. And this new life, still fragile, still timid, begins to push against the internal walls you built to protect yourself. Jung said that these walls are not fortresses, they are prisons, and the unconscious tries to break them down whenever you stray from your truth. Notice the tension in this. On one side, the old you, comfortable, predictable, limit. On the other, the new you, unknown, unpredictable, potentially extraordinary. This tension is the exact point where destiny begins decided. Not by external circumstances, not by opportunities, not by money, but by how you respond to the inner calling. Jung insisted that this is the most important moment in the entire human journey. It is when you choose between continuing to repeat the past or allowing the future to enter through the door that the unconscious is trying to open. And now observe, as you read these words, something inside you is stirring. Perhaps it's small, perhaps it's subtle, perhaps you can't even name it, but it's real. It's as if a faint light is finally finding a space to pierce the darkness you've carried for so long. That's how it begins. Not with explosions, but with recognitions. Not with certainties, but with sensations. Jung knew this. He always knew. And that is precisely why he whispers, through his teachings and the echo of his profound vision, do nothing more. Listen to what your soul is trying to say. Because this is only the beginning, and the next step will take you even deeper. But before proceeding, you need to admit to yourself that you felt something. Perhaps small, perhaps large, real. The journey only advances when the individual recognizes first calling. You recognized it, and if silently, even if discreetly, even if you still don't want to admit. Now Jung wants to take you to the next level, and that's where things start to intensify. From an early age, Jung insisted that the most important signs of the mind do not appear in extraordinary moments, but in the small episodes of ordinary life. Those that seem irrelevant carry a silent force capable of revealing what the unconscious is trying. He said that people think they need major event change, when, in fact, the soul speaks first through what is subtle, that uncomfortable feeling upon waking, the thought that insists on returning, the unexplained emotional exhaustion, the discomfort in the face of a life that seems to fit but does not satisfy. Each of these episodes, in Jung's view, is the language of the unconscious trying to break through the surface. Perhaps you've experienced something like this recently. You woke up on an ordinary day, did everything as usual, followed your routine, smiled when expected, answered messages, dealt with obligations. But inside, there was an inexplicable emptiness. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't deep anger. It was just a vague but persistent perception that something was out of alignment. Jung said that this kind of unease doesn't appear by chance. It arises when important parts of you begin to demand attention, requiring you to stop, look, and acknowledge that your outer life is no longer reflecting your inner life. And perhaps this happened in an even simpler moment, in traffic, while waiting for the light to change, looking out the window and realizing you were living on autopilot, or sitting in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling that something greater is waiting for you, but without knowing exactly what, or in a casual conversation, where a phrase said by someone affected you more than it should have, as if it had been directed straight to your soul. These are common scenarios, but they carry a symbolic power that Jung claimed to be the starting point of any profound transformation. He said that the unconscious uses these everyday moments as portals that pass through us when we least expect them, portals that reveal cracks in what we believe to be immutable. And it is in these cracks that the light enters, however small, a light that doesn't come from outside, but from within, a light that has always been there, but that you tried to ignore while carrying responsibilities, fears, guilt, own dream. The light doesn't force its way, it only waits for you to admit that you need it. And what happens when someone ignores these signs? Jung said that the unconscious doesn't give up, it tries again and again. First, it whispers through small discomforts. Then, it increases the intensity. Sometimes, it provokes inexplicable irritation. Other times, it creates strange coincidences that catch your attention. It could be someone telling you exactly what you needed to hear. It could be an opportunity arising at the exact moment you were questioning your life. It could even be a mistake, a stumble, a sudden loss that reveals what you've been avoiding. Jung called this inner reorganization, when life begins to move differently, not to punish you, but to awaken you. He stated that the psyche does everything to bring you back to the path of your truth, even if it means destabilizing the world you've built. Because there are times when balance is not a sign of peace, but of stagnation. And the unconscious knows this. It's not interested in maintaining the old order. It's interested in revealing who you truly are. Perhaps you've already experienced a coincidence so precise that it left you bewildered. Something that happened at the exact minute, as if it had been planned by an invisible intelligence. For Jung, this is not chance, synchronicity. It's the world responding to an inner movement that you haven't even consciously perceived yet. It's the universe showing you that there's more happening than your rational mind can explain. And these episodes, however simple they may seem, are the harbinger of a transformation that you don't yet understand, but that has already begun. The most curious thing is that Jung claimed that most people reject the signs precisely because they seem too simple. They expect a grand revelation, a dramatic epiphany, extraordinary event. But the unconscious rarely works that way. It prefers discrete paths, brief images, momentary sensations, small phrases that keep echoing. It wants you to notice, not to be frightened. It wants you to awaken, not to panic. And these signs, so subtle, keep repeating themselves until you finally admit, not here. Now imagine a scenario from your own day. Sitting at work, staring at the screen for a few seconds without really seeing it. And suddenly, a question arises. Is this really what I should be experiencing? This question could have been ignored if it were purely rational. But it came accompanied by a physical sensation, as if your chest had tightened, as if your breathing had changed, as if your body was trying to tell you something you didn't have the courage to admit. Jung said that this moment is the inner proof manifesting itself, and it doesn't happen just once. It comes back. It always comes back, so you recognize it. There are also unexpected moments, those that almost seem like scenes from a movie. You think about changing your life, and on the same day, you see someone talking about exactly that, or you hear a phrase that accurately describes a situation, or you meet someone who crosses your path and sparks a reflection you were trying to avoid. These encounters are not random. Jung said that the forces of the unconscious organize them symbolically, creating external experiences that reflect their internal needs. And that's what creates the discomfort, the feeling that something is talking to you through life itself. It's not magic. Deep psychology. It's the unconscious trying to show you that change has already begun within you, even if you're still standing still on the outside. And here's the crucial point of this part. Jung said that awakening is not an intellectual choice. It happens when the inner life surpasses the limit of silence, begins to demand recognition. When that point arrives, nothing is the same again. You can try to maintain the routine, try to cling to the old life. You can pretend that nothing has changed. But deep down, you know that something that cannot be, and that something is growing now. You read these words, as you reconstruct memories, as you realize that much of what you lived was just survival, not life. Jung would say that you are crossing the threshold, and thresholds are not comfortable places. They are places of transition, of disorientation, of discovery. And it is precisely in this state that the true transformation begins. The next part will show you what Jung called the inner proof, the point where the unconscious reveals with clarity the true path to psychological fortune and real change. And when you see this proof, nothing inside you will be able to pretend you didn't see it anymore. Jung said that the human mind announces its own rebirth long before any concrete change occurs. According to him, the true turning point begins when the unconscious decides to reveal something that was previously hidden, repressed, or forgotten. It's not an obvious or grand moment. It's an inner shift so subtle that it almost goes unnoticed, that it carries the force of a psychological earthquake. It's as if a silent door opens inside you, a door that wasn't there the day before, and behind it lies something you always knew but never dared to face. And this revelation is not external, internal, intimate, inevitable. It is precisely at this point that the inner proof emerged, a concept Jung used to explain the moment when the psyche communicates its truth so clearly that denial becomes almost impossible. The inner proof is not a mystical sign. It is a sudden recognition, perfect fit, the feeling that a peace finally returns to. It arises when your external life conflicts with your inner world so strongly that you can no longer hide behind justifications, fears, or distractions. It is the moment when you realize that something within you is ready to be born. Jung believed this is the most critical point in the human journey, because it is here that the individual discovers that they are no longer searching for something outside, but rediscovering something they have always carried within themselves. He said that the self, this deep instance of the seek, never delivers its call randomly. It delivers it at the exact moment when you have the internal conditions to see it. Seeing doesn't mean acting, and that's where the story starts to get complicated. What awakens within you when something makes too much sense to ignore? Many believe that the greatest obstacle to transformation is not knowing what to do, but Jung argued that the real obstacle is knowing what needs to be done and yet resisting. Because change hurts. We resist because facing one's own truth is an act of courage that few can sustain. We resist because the old self tries to survive at any cost, even if it means sabotaging the birth. And yet behind this resistance, there is a greater something that insists on moving forward, something that refuses to remain stuck where it is. Perhaps you've felt this before, that feeling that certain situations repeat themselves as if trying to teach you something. The same frustration that returns, the same emotional pattern that settles in, the same internal dialogue that tries to convince you to give up on something we intuitively know is necessary. Jung said that when a pattern repeats itself, it's not a failure. It's the psyche trying to show you that there's part of you that hasn't yet been, and until it's recognized, it will continue knocking on the door of your consciousness till you accept it. This is a detail that few people understand. There is no emotional evolution without confrontation. There is no clarity without discomfort. There is no transformation without a period of rupture. When Jung spoke of individuation, he wasn't referring to a beautiful, linear, or tranquil process. He was referring to the moment when you enter unknown territory within yourself, where nothing can be maintained by appearances and everything demands radical authenticity. The inner test appears as a brutal yet liberating mirror that reveals exactly who you are and who you need to stop being. What would you do if you realized that the only thing holding you back is an outdated version of yourself? In this process, Jung also warned about a curious phenomenon. The mind tends to present small coincidences at the exact moment you approach an important truth. This is not fantasy, it's synchronicity. These are events that seem too aligned to be random. When you think about changing careers and hours later someone mentions exactly that. When you start questioning a relationship and, on the same day, witness a scene that reveals something you needed to see. When a phrase found by chance describes your life with disconcerting precision, Jung said this happens because the unconscious and the external world cease to function as separate forces and begin to dialogue. This conversation between inner and outer reality doesn't arise to impress, but to confirm. It's as if reality is trying to tell you, yes, this is the way. And although many people are startled by these coincidences, Jung claimed that they are the purest and most elegant way for the unconscious to manifest it. He said that when you begin to notice these connections, it's because you're at the exact point of recognizing something that will irreversibly change your life. Here's a point that almost no one realizes. The inner test doesn't arrive when you're prepared. It arrives when you're honest. It doesn't appear when your life is organized, but when your soul is restless. It doesn't reveal itself when you're comfortable, but when your fragility allows the truth to slip through the cracks. And it is precisely this vulnerability that opens the way for the psychological rebirth Jung so often described. Jung said that there is a moment in the awakening process when the mind finally accepts that it can no longer return to its previous state. It's like crossing an invisible bridge. You don't notice the exact step where you left the old bank, but when you look back, there's no ground to stand on. The psychic turning point happens silently, irreversibly, almost always unexpectedly. It's not the result of willpower or logical reasoning, but of such a profound internal alignment that external life must follow. Jung insisted that this moment is a watershed, the instant when the individual stops resisting and begins to respond to their own inner calling. Many people believe that great transformations begin with grand decisions, but Jung knew that most of the time they begin with something seemingly small. He recounted cases of patients who changed their lives because of a phrase overheard by chance, because of a sudden sensation during a bath, because of a dream so real it seemed to have been lived in another dimension. There was even the case of a man who had been unhappy for decades and who, one ordinary morning, observing a leaf falling from a tree, understood that he was trapped in an emotional cycle that no longer belonged. This simple, almost banal image became the trigger for the complete transformation of his existence. Jung didn't find this absurd. He found it necessary. He said that the mind chooses symbols that can penetrate our defenses. Sometimes a falling leaf carries more truth than years of cowardly internal dialogue. This is where the inner proof gains strength. When this perception arrives, the body reacts before the mind. Some people report chills for no reason. Others say they feel a weight lift their chest. Others claim they had such a clear sensation of clarity that it seemed like an external intervention. Jung never underestimated the physical reaction. For him, the body is the first messenger of the unconscious. He said that when we are about to accept a truth too great for our old structures, the body tries to warn us. Something is changing. Something is aligning. Something is finally making sense. And this feeling is often accompanied by something even more curious. Life begins to respond immediately. Jung described several episodes of synchronicity that arose precisely at the moment when the individual approached their own essence. A woman who had dreamed for years of moving to another city, but never had the courage, was fired on the same day she silently decided she wanted to start over. Another woman who lived suffocated in a toxic relationship received, in the same week she admitted her unhappiness, a job offer in another state. A young man who had never been clear about his vocation met her coincidence. A former teacher who showed him an opportunity that would change his entire life. These events were not planned. They emerged at the exact moment when the inner psyche reorganized itself. For Jung, there's nothing magic. He said that external life is forced to move when the inner world changes direction. What seemed impossible begins to seem natural. What was once a blockage becomes a passage. What once seemed distant approaches with the speed of a destiny that has finally found its way. It's as if reality is just waiting for the moment when you stop running away from yourself and start moving in your favor. And perhaps you've experienced something like that without realizing it. Maybe you made a small decision, changing a habit, ending a conversation, refusing something you'd always accepted, and suddenly, new possibilities arose as if they were waiting for that gesture. Jung said that this is the clear sign of a turning point, when life stops pushing you back and starts pulling you forward. But there's an important detail that almost no one notices. The turning point isn't comfortable. It demands that you abandon parts of yourself that serve you. It demands that you face fears you've avoided for years. It demands that you relinquish the emotional security that, although limited, seemed stable. And this renunciation generates internal resistance. Jung said that it's at this point that many retreat. They prefer to stay where they are, even knowing that they no longer belong to that life. And that's why so many people remain stuck on the edge of their own transformation. However, something extraordinary happened when you overcome this resistance. Jung attracted patients who reported almost immediate changes after embracing their truth. There was the case of a man who had lived for years in deep anxiety, unable to make decisions. One day, during a session, Jung asked him, "What are you running away from?" The man remained silent. And in that silence, he perceived the answer. On leaving the office, He made the first clear decision. Days later, his life began to reorganize itself so quickly that he himself was frightened. Jung was not. He knew that inner clarity is like a magnet. It reorganizes everything around it. The same thing happens with people who finally accept who they are. Artists who tried to pursue traditional careers but renounced their creative calling, who only found prosperity when they embraced their own journey. Professionals who only discovered their true vocation after losing something they believed essential. Individuals who spent years trapped in relationships that drained their energy and who, upon leaving them, found a peace so profound that it seemed impossible within life. These accounts are not exaggerated, they are natural reflections of inner alignment. Jung said that the psyche cannot bear to live in contradiction for long. When you approach your own truth, everything that doesn't align with it begins to fall away. Sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly, but inevitably. And that's the central point of part 4. When the individual touches the inner proof, it's not just their mind that changes, it's the entire structure of their life. The way you see, decide, relate, choose, position yourself. Nothing remains the same when the unconscious finally. Transformation ceases to be a possibility. The next part will reveal how this change, when accepted, activates a movement of prosperity and clarity that expands rapidly. Jung said that this is the most beautiful and most dangerous stage of the journey, the moment when the old collapses and the new begins to be born, where true inner fortune awakens. Leave behind? Sometimes this inner test manifests as a question that has been repeated for years, but that you've never had the courage to answer. Other times, it appears as a growing discomfort in the face of something that previously seemed acceptable. There are also moments when it arises, intuition so strong that it feels almost physical, a silent nudge. No matter the form, the impact is always the same. A clear break between before and after. A point of no return. A revelation that changes not only how you see the world, but how you see yourself. And when that revelation arrives, Jung said that the individual finally touches the center of their own psyche. A center that doesn't ask permission to exist, doesn't negotiate, doesn't argue. It simply manifests. And when it manifests itself, it displaces everything around. The inner proof is a reminder that you are not here by chance, that there is a direction waiting to be taken, and that continuing to live on the surface is no longer a viable option. That's why Jung insisted that this moment is sacred, because it doesn't return the same way. It doesn't repeat itself in the same form. It's unique, precise, calculated by your own soul. It's the invitation that the deepest part of you makes to the rest of who you are. And refusing this invitation means postponing your own life. Accepting it means beginning a journey from which you will not return the same. The next part will reveal exactly what Jung's tipping point, the moment when the individual stops resisting and finally comes into alignment with themselves. And when that alignment happens, the change that seemed impossible becomes inevitable. Jung said that there is a moment in the awakening process when the mind finally accepts that it can no longer return to its previous state. Like crossing an invisible bridge. You don't notice the exact step where you left the old bank, but when you look back, there's no ground to stand on. The psychic turning point happens like this, silently, irreversibly, and almost always unexpectedly. It's not the result of willpower or logical reasoning, but of such a profound internal alignment that external life must follow. Jung insisted that this moment is a watershed, the instant when the individual stops resisting and begins to respond to their own inner calling. Many people believe that great transformations begin with grand decisions, but Jung knew that, most of the time, they begin with something seemingly small. He recounted cases of patients who changed their lives because of a phrase overheard by chance, because of a sudden sensation during a bath, because of a dream so real it seemed to have been lived in another dimension. There was even the case of a man who had been unhappy for decades and who, one ordinary morning, observing a leaf falling from a tree, understood that he was trapped in an emotional cycle that no longer belonged. This simple, almost banal image became the trigger for the complete transformation of his existence. Jung didn't find this absurd. He found it necessary. He said that the mind chooses symbols that can penetrate our defenses. Sometimes a falling leaf carries more truth than years of cowardly internal dialogue. This is where the inner proof gains strength. When this perception arrives, the body reacts before the mind. Some people report chills for no reason. Others say they feel a weight lifting chest. Others claim they had such a clear sensation of clarity that it seemed like an external intervention. Jung never underestimated the physical reaction. For him, the body is the first messenger of the unconscious. He said that when we are about to accept a truth too great for our old structures, the body tries to warn us. Something is changing. Something is aligning. Something is finally making sense. And this feeling is often accompanied by something even more curious. Life begins to respond immediately. Jung described several episodes of synchronicity that arose precisely at the moment when the individual approached their own essence. A woman who had dreamed for years of moving to another city, but never had the courage, was fired on the same day she silently decided she wanted to start over. Another woman who lived suffocated in a toxic relationship received, in the same week she admitted her unhappiness, a job offer in another state. A young man who had never been clear about his vocation met pure coincidence. A former teacher who showed him an opportunity that would change his entire. These events were not planned. They emerged at the exact moment when the inner psyche reorganized itself. For Jung, there's nothing magic. He said that external life is forced to move when the inner world changes direction. What seemed impossible begins to seem natural. What was once a blockage becomes a passage. What once seemed distant approaches with the speed of a destiny that has finally found its way. It's as if reality is just waiting for the moment when you stop running away from yourself and start moving in your favor. And perhaps you've experienced something like this without realizing it. Maybe you made a small decision, changing a habit, ending a conversation, refusing something you'd always accepted. Suddenly, new possibilities arose if they were waiting for that very gesture. Jung said that this is the clear sign of a turning point, when life stops pushing you back and starts pulling you forward. But there's an important detail that almost no one notices. The turning point isn't comfortable. It demands that you abandon parts of yourself that no longer serve you. It demands that you face fears you've avoided for years. It demands that you relinquish the emotional security that, although limited, seemed stable. And this renunciation generates internal resistance. Jung said that it's at this point that many retreat. They prefer to stay where they are, even knowing that they no longer belong to that life. And that's why so many people remain stuck on the edge of their own transformation. However, something extraordinary happens when you overcome this resistance. Jung attracted patients who reported almost immediate changes after embracing their truth. It was the case of a man who had lived for years in deep anxiety, unable to make decisions. One day, during a session, Jung asked him, "What are you running away from?" The man remained silent. And in that silence, he perceived the answer. On leaving the office, he made the first clear decision. Days later, his life began to reorganize itself so quickly that he himself was frightened. Jung was not. He knew that inner clarity is like a magnet. It reorganizes everything around. The same thing happens with people who finally accept who they are. Artists who tried to pursue traditional careers but renounced their creative calling, who only found prosperity when they embraced their own. Professionals who only discovered their true vocation after losing something they believed essential. Individuals who spent years trapped in relationships, drained their energy, and who, upon leaving them, found a peace so profound that it seemed impossible within their former life. These accounts are not exaggerations. They are natural reflections of inner. Jung said that the psyche cannot bear to live in contradiction for long. When you approach your own truth, everything that doesn't align with it begins to fall away. Sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly, but inevitably. When an individual taps into their inner self, it's not just their mind that changes, it's the entire structure of their life. The way they see, decide, relate, choose, and position themselves. Nothing remains the same when the unconscious finally finds its voice. Transformation ceases to be a possibility and becomes a consequence. The next part will reveal how this change, when accepted, activates a movement of prosperity and clarity that expands rapidly. Jung said that this is the most beautiful and most dangerous stage of the journey, the moment when the old collapses and the new begins to be born. It's where true inner fortune awakens. Jung said that there is a moment in the journey when the individual finally realizes not fighting against the world, nor against fate, nor against other people. They are fighting against the part of themselves that has learned to survive, but never learned to live. This is the endpoint of the process, and at the same time, the first step towards a completely renewed existence. The true turning point doesn't happen when something external changes, but when something within you rearranges itself so profoundly that no old structure can. This is the moment you are in now, facing the real possibility of becoming who you always were, but were afraid to embrace. For Jung, inner fortune is not a prize reserved for a select few. It is a psychological state that manifests in all who align their feelings, thoughts, and actions. It reveals itself when you stop negotiating with your own truths, when you stop delaying your choices, when you finally allow your life to reflect what your soul has always silently asked. And it is at this point that everything changes, because now it is no longer about recognizing the truth. It is about listening to it, responding to it, and acting upon it. True change begins when you decide to abandon old narratives. This doesn't mean impulsively breaking with everything, but breaking the habit of hiding behind it. It means admitting that certain relationships no longer make sense, certain paths no longer suit you, that certain guilts no longer need to be buried. Jung said that the psyche organizes itself towards truth always. And when you allow that truth to exist, your energy is freed, your perception clears, and your path begins to unfold before you. But how do you put this into practice? How do you transform a psychological awakening into... Jung believed there are 3 fundamental attitudes to begin the process. The first is the courage to look at yourself with absolute honesty. This means no longer running away from your own patterns, recognizing your fears, admitting your needs, and embracing your desires. It's about facing what you've denied for years without judgment, only with the responsibility of someone who understands that self-knowledge is a journey. The second attitude is to make a concrete move, even a small one. Jung said that courage is not measured in great and small, repeated actions that show the psyche that you are no longer betraying yourself. It could be a difficult conversation. It could be saying no for the first time. It could be ending something that holds you back emotionally. It could be starting something you've always postponed. It could be declaring to yourself what the next step you need to take is. The size of the gesture doesn't matter. What matters is that it represents your truth. The third attitude is trust the process. This is more difficult than it seems because your mind will try to regain control. It will want to ensure safety, predict outcomes, anticipate risks. But Jung said that life only organizes itself when you allow it to move according to your inner self, not according to you. Trusting means letting go of the need to have all the answers. It means allowing the path to reveal itself as you. It means believing that your inner consistency is stronger than any external uncertainty. And here's something Jung constantly repeated. Synchronicity only arises when the individual is aligned with themselves. When you speak the first truth, life responds. When you take the first step, the universe delivers the second. When you make your choice, the possibilities begin to organize them. Inner fortune isn't magic. The way it manifests makes it seem like it is. Because your actions begin to attract experiences, people, and opportunities that perfectly match your new state of consciousness. It's as if the world is waiting for you to position yourself so that it can open the doors that were closed. And perhaps you've already felt this. Perhaps you've already realized that when you act according to your true self, everything flows more naturally. Perhaps you've noticed that moments of courage bring positive consequences that you couldn't have foreseen. Perhaps you've experienced moments when life seemed to conspire in your favor the exact minute you decided to stop betraying your soul. This is not an illusion. This is the Jungian process, and it is the inevitable response of reality to an individual who has stopped living. Now you are faced with this choice, and it is not an intellectual choice. It is an existential choice. It is not about understanding, but about accepting. It is not about believing, but about acting. It is not about waiting, but about taking a stand. What will you do with the inner proof you have received? Will you ignore it as you have done so many times? Will you postpone it until the power of this moment fades? Or will you finally answer the call that has been silently accompanying you for years? The answer doesn't need to be public, grand, or immediate. It just needs to be true. It can be a small decision. It can be an honest conversation with yourself. It can be a change in how you value yourself. It can be a simple but definitive gesture. What's important is that it represents the beginning of a new life. The life that begins when you stop hiding from your truth. Jung said that the greatest human tragedy is dying before truly being born. And being truly born is not an event, process. It's a daily commitment to who you really are. It's the decision to no longer betray your essence out of fear, convenience, habit. It's the courage to live from what is authentic, even if the world doesn't yet understand. If you've made it this far, it means something within you has awakened. That something within you has recognized challenge. Something within you knows you can't continue living the same way. Now, only the final step remains, embracing the transition. Not impulsively, but with integrity. Not for the world, but for yourself. If this video touched you, it made sense at some point, if it revealed something you already knew, but never said aloud, then do 3 things now. First, like this video, not just to support the content, but to symbolically seal your commitment. Second, comment. It can be, I acknowledge the evidence. It can be something anonymous. It can just be a symbol. Commenting is a psychological gesture of affirmation. It's a way to materialize the internal decision. Third, subscribe to the channel. Here you will find more content that delves deeper into the journey of the mind, the unconscious, and human transformation. Your transformation has already begun. Now it's your turn to watch.